You're trying to deliver features as quickly as possible because you've got new clients coming on board, and like ultimately at the end of the day, it's about scaling, and so you've got to focus on those areas which are going to generate revenue.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Today I've got Lewis Prescott with me. And Lewis, do you want to introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. And my name's Lewis. I'm quality engineering lead at Care, which is a healthcare startup in London. I've been around the block, worked for quite a few different healthcare companies, cancer research as well, and yeah, for like large retailer as well, ASOS. So yeah, I've been around testing for like 8-9 years now, and yeah, I love kind of the agile testing, continuous testing, all that kind of stuff.
Nice one, awesome. Yes. So yeah, Lewis, I bumped into you at Cancer Research UK. I think I was looking you up before the call, and it looks like you did QA automation lead.
Hmm.
You were quality engineering lead.
Hmm.
QA lead, senior test analyst,
Hmm.
the list just goes on, but it's
Yeah,
all within testing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think since 2015, or
Hmm.
yeah, nice one, man.
Yeah.
So what are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so I'm the sole QA at Care. So yeah, I think talking about my experiences and talking about kind of how we can move testing to the left, shift left. So yeah, hopefully we can share with your listeners some pearls of wisdom.
Awesome, thank you. And I think that's a really good place to start. For those who of the listeners that don't know what shift left means,
Mhm.
should we start with a quick definition of what that is?
Yeah, for sure. So shift left is in the software development lifecycle. So you have the traditional kind of flow of work through development, through testing, through release, um, and obviously ahead of that you have all the scoping and the product side of things. And so what shift left testing tries to do is move um, that focus to that early onset, that early stages of the development life cycle.
Nice one, thank you. And Lewis, so in it, why is it so important to have testers and the right amount of testers, the right quality of testers, dare
Mm.
I say,
Mm.
at a startup?
Yeah, so a startup obviously moves quickly. You're trying to deliver features as quickly as possible because you've got new clients coming on board, and like ultimately at the end of the day, it's about scaling, and so you've got to focus on those areas which are going to generate revenue. So yeah, working in a startup is very fast moving, and often you haven't got the foundations. I know that sounds mad because at the startup you think, okay, everything's going to be built from scratch in the right way first time, but that's not the case. Like you just build something, get to market, and then you build on top of it. So it's all about being able to move quickly, but with the amount of like confidence that you can still retain those clients that you're gaining.
Yeah, and and that's such an important part of being a startup, because in a startup, and I've worked in a couple of startups
Hmm.
where we had one tester doing a
Yeah.
million things. The speed of getting that product to market is absolutely essential. It makes or
Yeah,
breaks your startup.
exactly.
And the amount of issues that would come with that. So obviously you've got your time constraint, but
Hmm.
then if you release something that is not of the right quality, it's buggy.
Mm.
There's security issues. There's just like a huge amount of things that come out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the hammer on the nail. That's it.
Yeah. um, yeah, I like the thing with being like a sole person only having one QA is that like testing is a team effort, and so it always should be, even when you have dedicated QAs on your team, it always should be a team effort. And that's where kind of startups want to be, is right. Like if you have a sole QA or you have a team of QAs, they don't want you to be testing all the time, right? They want you to be sharing that knowledge. They want you to be putting the processes in place so that everyone can be involved in that testing journey. So yeah, that's the kind of the startup mentality, and what's super important for QAs to think about.
Nice one. Okay, so that's time constraint. What else is on your mind in terms of problems with having low amount of sort of testers on a startup?
So the main one is obviously the mindset of a tester is quite a unique skill. So you're trying to spread that out across engineers who are also under time constraints to deliver on time. So, and there's a skill gap there where they're not necessarily the most testing upskilled in testing, unit testing even, and then obviously integration testing and other layers. So yeah, the kind of skill gap there is definitely a big one. And testing now is much more expanded, right? We talk about shifting it left from a security perspective, from performance testing perspective, all those kind of skills. If you have a big team, you have specialists all in each of those areas, whereas now we're asking them to be like full stack across everything. So yeah, it's just a case of being able to engineer all those skills into a cross-functional team.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because testers, there's not just one way to test. Testers
Yeah.
actually have many hats. There's the testers that work with the customer feedback, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There's the UI, the user interface testers. There's the ones who do the automation.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different type of testers within that sort of within the build phase.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to expand on that for us, Lewis?
Yeah, exactly. So there's multiple different roles and like different skill sets. So like developers are in test, for example, they'll sit with engineers and be able to write unit tests and be able to like build those frameworks from scratch. You've got the test analysts who are like testing it from a user's perspective. You've got the back end specialists who are looking at the APIs and looking at events that are being fired. And like obviously our experience with cancer research, you've got the data QA engineers who are looking at like the migration pieces and all that kind of stuff. So like there's very specialist areas. Every organization has some kind of specifications around this as well. But you need the tester to kind of be at every phase, and that's what I was talking about, like continuous testing. Is you need someone in there with their testing hat on at every phase, just going, okay, at the build phase, how do we go about testing this? Once it's not code anymore, once it's in the application, how are we going to test this? Once it's in production, how are we going to test this? So like, it's just all of those questions that need to be asked.
You mentioned unit testing. What does that mean? What is unit testing?
So you can break code down into specific units. So a unit is like an if statement in programming, or like a piece of logic, like a small piece of logic that's written into the code. And we want to test that within a unit test because it's an isolated piece of code that we can test. And we can have hundreds of these, right? And that's where we want to put in all of our edge cases to, if you've got time zones, for example, you're supporting multinational, you want to put all of those in your unit test to say all these conditions, and then you build from there. But yeah, so that's the unit test piece.
Okay, so Lewis, from your perspective as somebody who works as a tester in a startup, what are your observations in terms of how do we face these challenges? What's good practice?
Hmm. Yeah, so a couple of things that I've implemented at multiple companies is the kind of zero bug policy. So zero bugs doesn't mean zero bugs. It means we're trying to really refine down what we mean by bug, and also we're focusing on the things that are really important. So if something's a low priority, then that doesn't get raised, for example. That's one of the things. And then obviously it's building out that process so that everyone can follow it, and just putting in those kind of quality gates at each step. So is the story ready? Have that technical discussion before you start, build in that acceptance criteria as you're going along.
Awesome. So you mentioned that getting the user story ready, and I know from working with some testers in the past, there's something called BDD or TDD. Do you use those, and what are these?
Yeah. So I've used BDD a lot in the past, so business driven development, and that's directly correlating, right, the acceptance criteria in a story to your tests. And that works really well when you have a business analyst, you have a tester, and you have a dev all bought into the process and all kind of pulling in the same direction. That does require a lot of effort up front. And then the BDD frameworks that exist in test automation are very flexible, and so it's hard to follow the best practices, and people pick up bad habits. So it's often not the actual methodology that's the problem, it's the people following it.
Yeah.
I've used that in the past. I kind of steer away from that as much as possible to try and get people on board with writing tests, right, and removing the friction of a framework. So just building into your unit test, for example, you would write it in BDD format, like given when then, or you'd write it in a way which kind of describes the scenario to a high level, rather than just putting like this tests this function. So you're building it in, but without the kind of the framework and the kind of the noise around it. And then TDD is a great thing, but again, you've got to have the skill set, and it's a mindset thing. So TDD is test-driven development. You only write a piece of code if you have a test that is failing. So it has a lot of stigma, say. I don't know if stigma is the right word, but like in the industry, people kind of go back and forth with it. But ultimately, that's what we need to deliver, right? If we're a small organization, you have not many people available to do manual testing, not many people available to even review your code.
Yeah.
You need to have a strong test coverage. So that's the kind of best way to achieve that, in my opinion.
Thank you. And so I'm obviously, I come from a Scrum Master, Agile coach background, and so we write from a user's perspective. And so you've got your user story format of, as a type of user, I want something so that I can achieve a value. How does that fit with TDD, for example? Would you approach it in the same way, or is it like, how would you set that up?
Yeah, so like a few times what I've done is acceptance test driven development. So just adding that extra layer. It's very similar to BDD, like it's just that extra layer of TDD is the granular level, that kind of logic that sits at the unit level, and then the acceptance tests, they're the ones that fit into that kind of user story and thinking about it from that perspective. But you're still thinking about it throughout the journey. It's just you often need that extra layer to achieve that. And yeah, basically acceptance test driven development is just you write your acceptance test first, so that whether that's a UI layer or the API layer, you write that test first, then you write the unit test, and then you build on that cycle.
Awesome, thank you. So another thing that I was thinking about was, when you've got a sole tester in a startup, there's bound to be things that get dropped, such as documentation. And so, without that documentation, you could, in the long run, end up with problems. Do you have that sort of? Have you come across that?
Yeah, and that's why I kind of always endorse that you need to have a form of like living documentation, whether that's your tests that form that, or whether that's like what my company do really well is our like support documentation. So it's like how you use the system, and you should be able to like walk through that. And what I get like the product team and devs to do is walk through the support documentation and go, okay, like does that map with how the application is actually coded? Like, does that terminology map with that one? Like, and does that journey map with the test that we've got? And so it's, yeah, you need to have some form of living documentation, because as you say, that middle layer, which is what I really enjoy and what like I find a lot of value in, is the technical documentation that has a bit of a user kind of spin on it, but you couldn't give it to a user because they would be like, this is too technical. So that doesn't exist, right? In a startup, you just like either come from the user's perspective or you look at the code. That's it. I think testing is one of those things which like at previous organizations, you rely on your testers because they've got like that mindset. They've got a very like regimented process which they kind of set up, and it creates a bit of a gate. So yeah, it's trying to just change that mentality, and like it's embedded within a lot of organizations and a lot of engineering teams. So yeah, it's just breaking that cycle, and then yeah, pushing more of it to the like monitoring side of things. So making sure that you are kind of testing in production and seeing what's going on with your users, and setting that up in a test environment so you can simulate that across the board. But yeah, I think a lot more of it needs to be not necessarily written down. It's a case of monitoring and observing what's happening.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so Lewis, what is QA automation, and how is test automation going to help?
Yeah, so like when you're releasing a piece of software, you want to check that nothing's broken when a new feature gets released, or you're making a change to an existing feature. And so test automation is great at checking. So it checks that the code behaves as you expect it to behave. It doesn't do like the exploratory testing stuff, where you're exploring the system and finding unknowns. So test automation is great at doing checking. So if you want to have a regression pack which you run before every release or every PR pull request, then automation testing is great to sit in there. And whether that's UI automation, API automation, or just your unit level automation.
Nice one. And I'd imagine that's crucial if you're the sole tester at a place and you need to do repetitive sort of testing, that if you've got some automation there, it's very it helps you massively with time, effort, so that you can focus on other bits while that automation test is running in the background.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just having that safety net, and it's not going to catch everything, but it's definitely that safety net. And yeah, it's just a case of making sure that you build that in to that development process, and everyone owns those tests.
Right. It's quite early. Have you had your coffee?
Yeah.
You know, I've had about 3 coffees already. What time is it? Oh yeah. No, I've had 3 coffees and an espresso.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was going to say. That's where like low code testing tools are really coming into their own now. It's like you don't have the time and you don't have the skills to do test automation. So the low code tools, especially in like a startup, you're moving quickly, which is something that we want to explore to see how that will help us with that.
So I've heard quite a few names of tools like Gherkin, Jenkins, etc. Which ones are we talking about when we're talking about automation?
Yeah, so we use like Playwright, which is one that's come out of Microsoft, and then Cypress is a big user for us as well. It's both use UI automation tools, and then for API we use like Postman, which is a way to interact with APIs, and then we have our kind of lower level tests which use Super Test, which I think is a great name for a testing framework. So yeah, and then like Jest, they all have like really like obscure names, which is
very cool. Yeah, very cool names, obscure as you say. So Lewis, what's on your continuous learning? What's on the horizon for you as a quality engineer?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things really, because like obviously AI tools are now like really coming into their own and really adding value. So how can we build those into our testing process to make it easier to onboard people? And then how can we move testing into people's processes without having a dedicated engineer? So like I'm constantly learning about how like different organizations work and how testing can be embedded into there.
Awesome. Well, Lewis, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an eye-opener. It's so good to hear about all these things that you're up to, and wishing you all the best with your continuous learning journey.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Pleasure. Take care, and we'll see you soon, I hope.